Why? Matthew asked the voice in his heart. However, the other party did not answer. Matthew looked up at Suya, who was sitting on the throne with a divine expression. It was as if Zai's mission or the voice in Matthew's heart had nothing to do with her. What is this? Is she still going to put on the airs of the soul of the rainforest? Matthew suddenly laughed in his heart. Because she couldn't bring herself to ask for help to expel the Dragon Lich sect, so she simply used the name of the Seven Saint Alliance. He saw through it very clearly. Zai was definitely from the Alliance of Seven Saints, but his mission was to recon. Based on what Zai said, he couldn't contact the Alliance and, therefore, shouldn't have the right to issue any missions. In this way, the real client of this mission was obvious. As he thought about this, Matthew's smile had a hint of mockery. However, he soon stopped smiling. Because the little foot that had been rubbing against him suddenly kicked him at a position that was quite fatal. At that time, Matthew almost hissed and keeled over. In the next second, Matthew met Bobo's suspicious gaze. Are you actually daydreaming? Hurry up and say your opinion. We've already expressed our stance. Matthew coughed and looked at Zai apologetically. I'm sorry, I was indeed a little distracted just now. What did you guys say? Bobo said unhappily. Lumiere and I have decided to accept his request. It's better for the people of the Dragon Lich sect to go to hell sooner or later. However, at the same time, we would like to hear your opinion. After all, in terms of cunning, I'm afraid we are not as good as necromancers. Lumiere nodded in agreement with Bobo. Both of them looked at Matthew. The latter immediately muttered. I need more information. The current information doesn't allow me to make a judgment. Blinken is a level 20 necromancer. He's too dangerous. Zai immediately said. In fact, that's just his level on the surface. Blinken has been oppressed by the Book of Blasphemy for a long time, and his strength has dropped quite a bit. Now, he had to spend a portion of his power to suppress that semi-divine weapon at all times, so his true combat strength was only around level 18. If you think that tracking Blinken is difficult, I can provide a little help in this regard. This is my job. As he spoke, he took out a chubby and round little elf from a small cloth pocket at his waist. Then, he knelt on one knee and placed the little elf on the ground. I don't know. After the little elf landed, she immediately revealed a pitiful expression. Its skin was light blue, and there were water ripples flowing on it. Be good, little boo-boo. It won't hurt very much. Zai said gently. The little elf immediately covered her eyes with her hands, but her hands were too short. She could only cover the corners of her eyes. The rest of her eyes were watery, and she looked very pitiful. Zai raised his right palm and slapped the elf's forehead. At the same time, he shouted the name of the Dragon Lich sect's priest, Blinken. The little elf was smashed into pieces by this slap, and its body turned into a huge puddle of water. In the middle of the water stain, a clear image quickly appeared. The light of dawn penetrated the dense rainforest and hit the huge banana leaves. A few crystal-clear dewdrops could be seen rolling back and forth on the leaves. Suddenly, a large hand pushed the banana leaf away impatiently, and the dew immediately rolled down from the edge. The camera quickly moved up and then looked down at the sparse team from a high position. They were the Dragon Lich sect people. Looking down from this angle, the composition of the team could be seen at a glance. The black-robed man, Blinken, was walking at the front. Behind him were 4 well-equipped dragon blood warriors, followed by more than 20 dragon-worshipped disciples in brown robes. The members of the 4th echelon were all ground fire dragons, and the one in charge of driving them away was a dragon blood warrior at the back. The entire army was orderly as they passed through the rainforest. Even the earth fire dragon, which was the most prone to making mistakes, appeared to be extremely intelligent. It could be seen that Blinken had put in a lot of effort in managing the team. As they walked, the black-robed man suddenly raised a hand. Stop. There were nearly 200 units in the team, and they were in the complex terrain of the rainforest. However, with a single order from Blinken, every unit stopped in place within 2 seconds. Matthew saw a fire dragon sink into the mud because of the sudden break. But even so, it did not move at all, allowing the mud to drown its fat body gradually. Blinken looked around and said coldly, "Rest for 8 minutes. Next, prepare for battle." With that, he rushed in front of the ground fire dragon and pulled it out of the mud. Too careless. Blinken seemed to be reprimanding him sternly, but in the next second, he cast a cleanse on the fire dragon. The fire dragon howled and kissed Blinken's shoes. The atmosphere gradually relaxed. Everyone was resting on the spot. Only Blinken himself kept walking back and forth. His eyes occasionally looked around and occasionally swept across the crowd. Suddenly, his gaze paused on a Dragon Lich sect disciple for 3 seconds before he walked quickly toward him. The Dragon Lich sect disciple panicked. He stood up from the ground and was about to say something when Blinken grabbed his collar. In the next second, Blinken carefully tidied the creases on his collar and adjusted the angle of the Dragon Lich sect badge on his chest. Remember, no matter how big the crisis is, humans must not panic and must not forget to take care of their appearance. This is the biggest difference between humans and animals. Next time, if I find out that there's a problem with the angle of your badge, I'll expel you from the Dragon Lich sect immediately. The believer opened his mouth in excitement. Lord Blinken, I. Blinken helped him tidy up his appearance and patted his shoulder. Don't talk. Do your job well. After saying that, he quickly left and looked elsewhere. A few minutes later, Blinken led his team and set off again. This time, the camera couldn't keep up with them. Instead, it watched them leave the forest and arrive at a relatively open highland. On the ground, the water droplets slowly disappeared. From a large puddle at the beginning, it gradually became a small ball. In the end, all the water droplets merged into a round ball of meat. Buzzy, Buzzy. The little elf stood with her hands on her hips angrily as if she was scolding Zayai. Zayai, who was prepared, immediately took out a lead block from his waist and handed it over. The elf grabbed the lead and swallowed it. The lead appeared in its translucent stomach, and bubbles popped out. The elf burped in satisfaction, and the lead disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. Buzzy is a scouting elf, but its scouting method is a little tragic. Zayai smiled shyly and put away the elf. Matthew nodded. Those images were indeed very clear, and they were not detected by Blinken, who was a quasi-legend. This meant that the elf's investigative ability was very high. He extracted 3 pieces of information from the previous image. First, Blinken was indeed a strong leader. The evil camp's people were often difficult to train, but he could make every subordinate obey orders obediently. Although there was a reason for his strength, Blinken's personal charm and management skills also accounted for a large proportion. The underground allied army of the Order of Calamity was nothing more than a bunch of wandering soldiers in front of Blinken's troops. Secondly, Blinken seemed to have a very serious obsessive-compulsive disorder. It was no wonder that he was so angry at Suya's slip of the tongue when he withdrew from the Black Banyan Dream. Thirdly, after leaving the Black Banyan Dream, the direction of the march seemed familiar. Matthew thought for a while and confirmed that the highland they were about to reach was the place where he had fought alongside Old Lucky and Lorraine. It was the edge of the Bitter Water Swamp. Judging from his posture, it seemed that he was going deep into the Bitter Water Swamp. If Matthew did not know that the former owner of the swamp was called Dania, he would have really associated Blinken with the legendary necromancer. What's the use of the verdant branch? Matthew asked Suya. Suya said calmly. It's one of the foundational items of the rainforest. With it, the Dragon Lich sect disciples can move freely in the rainforest to a certain extent, reducing the risk of encountering poisonous insects and beasts. At the same time, it's also a natural define item. It's something that druids, rangers, and nature souls dream of. Matthew thought for a moment. So, Blinken snatched the verdant branch to fight a protracted war in the rainforest. He didn't intend to attack with one fell swoop, or rather, he didn't have the ability. Zayai echoed. What you said is very reasonable. Blinken is a very smart person. He never does anything impulsive. This sudden intrusion into the rainforest is the most impulsive thing I've ever seen him do, but he handled it in an orderly manner. To be honest, if he weren't an enemy of the Alliance, I would want to be friends with him. Matthew nodded slightly. To be able to make the scouts sincerely admire him, Blinken was not simple. This kind of brave and resourceful enemy was the most troublesome. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Matthew was not willing to make him an enemy. My suggestion is that we can track Blinken and try to stop him from destroying the rainforest. If we had the chance, I would even be willing to negotiate with him. The best option would be to persuade him to leave the rainforest without using force. Matthew explained seriously. A level 20 mage is already very powerful. Blinken used to work in the Seven Saint Alliance and defected to the Dragon Lich sect. It wasn't that I lacked the courage to fight, but that I didn't want anything to happen to anyone present. Of course, if negotiation is not possible, then force will be necessary. I believe that with our strength and cooperation, killing him is not impossible. Zayai thought for a moment. But how do you plan to persuade him? Although Blinken was very smart, he was also very stubborn. He had already determined that the dragon's tomb really existed, so he would never give up. Matthew asked. Don't you think it's strange? I'm referring to the news about the dragon's tomb and the sandstorm bandits. Zai was taken aback before turning serious. Please share with us. Matthew turned to Bobo. I remember Yulian telling us that day that the sandstorm bandits had recently erupted into internal strife. Both sides have been constantly fighting in the city, but in the end, they have mistaken their targets several times. The ones who died were all outsiders, right? Bobo nodded vigorously. Matthew chuckled. The bandit gang got the wrong target. You must be joking. I can understand if they are a knight regiment or a warrior regiment, but I can't understand how a bandit regiment that is famous for intelligence investigation and accurate assassination could get their targets wrong. Realization dawned on Bobo. So that fatty lied to us. Zai coughed when he heard that. He probably didn't lie to you. I've also verified this information. It's true. The places where both sides exchanged fire were both inside and outside the city of Condor, and most of the people who died were indeed outsiders who were accidentally involved. Matthew gave a direct conclusion. I think that the internal strife of the sandstorm bandits might be an act. Yulian once told me that, other than me, he also sold the news of the seabed tomb to another group. This means that someone might be interested in the seabed tomb, but he did not dare to take the risk. Therefore, he found the sandstorm bandits and put on an act. His ultimate goal was to encourage the Dragon Lich sect to scout the way first. Of course, this was only one of the guesses. There were many different situations, and my guesses had many loopholes. For example, if the Dragon Lich sect was strong enough to take down the seabed tomb, the mastermind might not get anything. This would not work. For example, it was doubtful that such a smart Blinken would take the bait. Just because of the internal strife of the sandstorm bandits. In short, there are indeed many loopholes in this matter. We haven't found out the truth yet, but we can use these to negotiate with Blinken first. From the way he snatched the verdant branch and left the Black Banyan dream realm in time, it could be seen that he was a rational person. As long as he was rational, no matter how evil he was, he could still negotiate. After saying this, Matthew was a little thirsty, so he picked a leaf and twisted it into a funnel shape. He rubbed a glass of water for himself and asked everyone as he drank. What do you think? Suya rested her chin on her hand as she looked at Matthew with relish. She also crossed her legs. Lumiere shook his head silently. Bobo seemed to have entered a standstill state. Only Zai exclaimed. Your thinking is really clear. You can grasp so many key points at once. I think you're more qualified to be a spy than me. Why didn't such an outstanding mage like you join the Seven Saint Alliance? Matthew smiled modestly. If it were any other mage, they might be able to analyze it more thoroughly than I do. The few of them discussed for a while. In the end, even Suya tacitly agreed to Matthew's plan. Matthew let the others rest for a while. He said that he needed to find a place to write 2 letters. Although he was confident in his plan, he was also worried that he was too young and inexperienced. The plan he formulated might have hidden dangers. Therefore, he decided to write a letter to ask the experienced big shots. Originally, Master Ronan was the best advisor. It was a pity that he wasn't here. Matthew was going to write to Zeller, hoping that his seniors, including Zeller, Richard, and Lee Wiki, could give him some advice. The other letter was intended for Peggy. Although he had completed his advancement, it was obviously not Matthew's style to leave the matter of the Dragon Lich sect alone. As a result, he might stay in the south for more than a month, and he would have to remind Peggy of many things. The content that he was about to write went through his mind. Matthew took out a letter and a pen from his bag. At this moment, Suya's voice sounded in his ear. Follow me. Then, Matthew saw a beautiful figure quickly disappear into the forest on his left. He stood up and walked in that direction without batting an eyelid. However, Matthew did not know that Bobo and Lumiere, who had long since noticed his abnormality, saw the scene. The two of them looked at each other and then looked at the throne. However, there was no trace of the soul of the rainforest on the throne. Lumiere had a complicated look on his face and did not speak. Bobo suddenly asked, if a human and a nature soulmate, will she give birth to a human or a nature soul? Lumiere was stunned. They shouldn't have reached this level, right? Bobo looked at him in disdain. Are you blind? Lumiere scratched his head in embarrassment. Sorry, this question is beyond my knowledge. I really don't know what will happen. After all, I'm just a country bumpkin who hasn't left the rainforest much. Bobo said seriously, please don't say that. Lumiere's heart warmed. In the next second, Bobo said seriously, country bumpkins might even have more knowledge than you. Lumiere's face stiffened. Here, this one is for you. Don't be dejected anymore. Bobo randomly took out a colorful candy and an alarm clock from her bag. She placed the alarm clock on the ground and patted the button on it. The clock's needle slowly moved. Then she handed the colorful candy to Lumiere. I'll treat you to a smart candy. You'll become smarter after eating it. Lumiere gratefully accepted the candy, but he did not eat it but put it in his pocket close to his chest. After doing all this, Bobo began to polish her armor silently. Lumiere pointed at the alarm clock on the floor and asked, "What are you doing?" "Oh, to time Matthew," Bobo replied casually. "Aren't you curious how long it'll take him to write letters, I mean?" In the small forest, Suya casually set up a hazy barrier. She elegantly walked to a round tree stump and stopped. She turned around and looked at Matthew. "You can write here. But before that, I have to ask you. Why didn't you listen to my advice?" Her expression became stern and fierce as if the irritable soul of the rainforest had returned. Matthew said calmly, "Someone has to deal with the matters of the Dragon Lich sect." Suya said coldly, "Lumiere can take care of them." Matthew shook his head and said, "This is too dangerous. I can't let him go alone." Suya paced back and forth angrily with a dark face. A moment later, she suddenly sighed. The anger on her face disappeared and was replaced by a deep worry. She closed her legs and slowly sat on the tree stump. "I'm very weak now. The Book of Blasphemy has contaminated the source of the Black Banyan's dream. I need to spend a lot of energy to purify it. I need someone to protect me, Matthew." This was the first time Matthew saw a pleading look in Suya's eyes. Matthew muttered, "If it's just protection, Lumiere or anyone else can do it." "No," Suya said decisively, "I don't trust him." Matthew was stunned for a moment. He had thought about the various reasons why Suya looked at him differently, but he did not expect her to give such a reason. "I came from the rainforest myself, so I know very well what is engraved in the blood of every creature here. I trust none of them equally, including your partner Lumiere," Suya said coldly. Matthew didn't refute her. He was just thinking about whether her words were correct or not. "I am only the soul of the rainforest, not the god of the rainforest," Suya said softly. "Do you think I like to pretend to be hot-tempered every day? But if I didn't do this, they would immediately think that I was weak. I will be instantly pushed down and destroyed. Today, when the Dragon Lich sect attacked the Black Banyan Dream Realm, I summoned many animals, but I didn't summon the pattern giant crocodile. Do you know why? I'm afraid that it will eat me when it comes in. Trust me, it won't miss this opportunity." It was not the only one. Dinosauruses and winged dragon wind gods were the same. Every ferocious beast in the rainforest cherished the opportunity to climb up the food pyramid. Therefore, I can only feel a sense of security after they die and advance into war beasts. Because I was born surrounded by wolves. Matthew. Can you understand this feeling? Matthew looked over. Suya's expression was still very stubborn, but there were tears in her eyes. "Lumiere is not that kind of person, I believe," Matthew said. Suya smiled. "You believe? That sounds like you have been convinced by me." Matthew did not disagree. "Then why do you trust me?" he asked. "Because you come from a civilized world, and you have the recognition of the oak forest," Suya said softly. "Oak is not great, but she has always been very accurate in judging people. Even if the oak forest related to you has not officially become a nature soul, I still believe her judgment." After Matthew heard this, he roughly understood Suya's current situation. However, he still looked apologetic. "But I can't let them go alone. I'm worried about their safety." Suya looked at him bitterly. "So you don't worry about my safety?" Matthew scratched his head. "How about I leave a bone dragon with you? Get lost." Suya's expression suddenly changed. "Who wants your bone dragon, stinky necromancer? You and your summoned creatures better stay far away from me. I don't want your protection." Matthew raised his eyebrows. He realized Suya's little trick, but he did not point it out. He only smiled playfully. "It's not a good thing to throw a tantrum at the soul of the rainforest now. After all, you've already exposed your weakness." Not willing to be outdone, Suya slapped the tree stump between her legs with her right hand. "Come on. Come at me if you have the ability. Aren't you going to write a letter? I'll just sit here and not leave. Or you can go right somewhere else. Or you can move me away from here. If you're a man, you'll know which to choose. Matthew immediately rushed over. After a while, he successfully subdued Suya from an extremely tricky angle. Suya was forced to half kneel in front of the tree stump, her face filled with disbelief. Matthew said leisurely, "Well, this is perfect. I'll dictate, and you write for me." He slapped the letter and quill on the stump. Suya immediately screamed, "Are you still a man?" Matthew said calmly, "So, will you write for me?" Suya gave up and said, "Fine. I'll write." "Let go." Matthew let go of her hand cautiously. Suya begrudgingly went to grab the quill and letter. "What do you want me to write?" Suya suppressed her anger. Matthew cleared his throat. "Darling Zeller." "Darling." Suya raised her head and almost dropped her quill. Matthew pressed her head down. "Just write. Don't ask too many questions." Suya snorted lightly. Her face was slightly red as she obediently wrote. Hint: Rainforest Souls favorability +1+1+1. Matthew looked at it and smiled. The 2 letters were quickly written. Matthew quickly left the Black Banyan Dream and summoned Ella from the Moonlight Woodlands, who had been resting for a long time. He asked her to bring the 2 letters back to Rolling Stone Town. Then, he rested for a while in the Black Banyan Dream realm. An hour later, just as they were about to set off to negotiate with Blinken, Matthew was surprised to hear such a great piece of news. Hint: since you have successfully completed the advancement, the power limit of your contracted summoned creature, Torn Skeleton, will be passively removed within 24 hours. You can also choose to manually remove the limit in advance to recover more of the Torn Skeleton's original power. Is there such a thing? I was the one who restricted Peggy's strength. Why didn't we know about this when we signed the contract? Matthew was stunned. He did not hesitate. He chose to cancel the limitation manually. A little earlier, another morning arrived in Rolling Stone Town. The sky lit up. Pedestrians shuttled to and fro on the street of farmers. Housewives or old people carrying baskets walked and stopped in front of the stalls, saying good morning to each other, asking about the price, and occasionally chatting. The streets were filled with voices. At a stall selling white radishes at the corner of the street, the stall owner, Mary, was tidying up the vegetable stall. Suddenly, her vision blurred, and the 2 white radishes disappeared into thin air. Ding! A few loose coins landed on the stall. Mary accepted the money as if nothing had happened. She turned to her husband, who was cleaning the donkey cart, and said, "That invisible person actually came to buy white radishes today." The husband asked in a daze, "Haven't our white radishes always been delicious?" Mary shook her head and said, "He bought it once 2 years ago, but he hasn't bought it since. He probably doesn't like it himself. Perhaps there was a guest at the invisible person's house today, and the guest liked it, so he bought it." The husband put down the brush in his hand, hugged Mary's waist from behind, and praised, "You're really smart." Mary was proud for a while, then she seemed to have thought of something and said seriously, "So don't think about fooling me. I heard that you've been getting close to that slut Jenny recently. If you get caught, HMPH. The husband trembled and repeatedly expressed that he wouldn't. Mary kissed him contentedly. The sun gradually rose. Not long after, a tall shadow appeared in the alley next door. Peggy carried the basket and counted the dishes she had bought the day. White radish, carrot, beef eyes, beef liver. The recipe that Sif mentioned should only need these ingredients. Not long after, she walked briskly back home, only to find that the kitchen was already flaming. She walked over and saw that Sif, who had stayed the night before, was cooking a pot of delicious soup. Peggy asked curiously, "What soup are you making?" "Baby." Sif pulled up her chef's dress, which had been enlarged by who knows how many sizes, and raised her spoon. She turned around and smiled. "I made soup with the fish jelly and mushrooms that I ate last night. By the way, didn't I always say that I wanted to try to make a dish that even the undead could taste? I added something special to the soup today. Do you want to try it?" As she spoke, she scooped a bowl of soup for Peggy. Peggy took the soup and stuffed it directly into her chin, ignoring the boiling heat. Unlike Soldier, the hot soup flowed down her neck, but before it could seep out or drip out, it was instantly evaporated by her soul fire. She even burped like a human. "The soup is not bad. Unfortunately, I still can't taste it." Peggy looked at Sif's disappointed eyes and patted the girl's shoulder. "Don't be discouraged, baby. You're already very good. When Matthew comes back, your cooking will shock him. Ha ha ha, I can't wait to see that scene." However, in the next second, Sif suddenly widened her eyes. Peggy didn't realize what had happened. What's wrong, Sif? Sif pointed at Peggy's chest and said. There was a light there just now, and then you seemed to be completely different. Peggy looked down. She realized that her chest was shining with a bright white light. I'm going to level up. Peggy was overjoyed. Ever since I followed that loser Matthew, I haven't leveled up. What's going on today? I can feel that surging power. Wait, could it be because of this bowl of soup? Sif waved her hand, indicating that she didn't know anything. Peggy was about to get another bowl. However, all of a sudden, her chest emitted a white light again. This bowl of soup of yours actually has such a powerful effect that it can let me advance 2 levels in a row. Peggy exclaimed. Sif was also shocked. The two of them looked at each other, not knowing what to say. After a while, 2 more white lights appeared on Peggy's body. Why am I still leveling up? Peggy grabbed Sif's shoulder in ecstasy. Child, we might have discovered a huge secret. That's your fish jelly mushroom soup. It can allow the undead to level up quickly. We're rich, baby. I have to share this good news with the stingy Matthew. Oh, Matthew isn't here, forget it. I'll just ignore him. I'll secretly level up and give him a surprise later. She had a party dancing between the kitchen and the living room. Suddenly, she heard someone knocking on the door politely. Sif pushed the door open. There was an owl outside. Rolling Stone Town, Liege's Manor, study room. Wearing a sleeping robe, Rieger yawned as he pushed open the door from the corridor and entered. As expected, an unbelievably handsome guy was already neatly dressed and sitting at his desk, waiting for him. Wait, I'll get Madame Wesley to make me a pot of coffee. As he spoke, Rieger poked his head out from the side door of the study and called out the maid's name. When he took the coffee from the servant and walked slowly to the table, Zeller had already placed a letter in front of him. Matthew's letter. Zeller said. Who? Rieger held his coffee and blew gently, his face full of confusion. Matthew, your magic consultant. Zeller reminded. Rieger looked extremely surprised, but his expression was too exaggerated. Wait. I have a magic consultant. The guy who applied for a month of paid leave on his first day at work. Zeller smiled. I helped him with his application. Rieger sat down on the soft chair and took a sip of the hot coffee. At the same time, he said in a muffled voice, I knew you were in Voleveld. What did the letter say? He took another big gulp of coffee. He might have to continue taking leave. Zeller hadn't finished his sentence. Rieger spat the coffee out. The coffee spilt on half of the desk. Sure, but he won't be getting any salary. Rieger said indignantly, a while ago, Doolin and the others asked me if I needed them to recommend a magic consultant. I said that my residents already had one and declined their kindness. Recently, I have a few magic questions that I can't find anyone to ask. Zeller handed over a clean white handkerchief. Perhaps you can write to him. There's no need. Write back and tell him to play as long as he wants outside. It's best if he never returns to Rolling Stone Town. Rieger complained as he wiped the table. His eyes were filled with resentment. Seeing this, Zeller coughed lightly and added, Matthew also mentioned in his letter that he was in a bit of trouble. Rieger revealed an expression of I knew it. I knew that necromancers are troublemakers wherever they go. Zeller retorted, but he's been planting trees in Rolling Stone for 3 years. And has never caused any trouble. Rieger snorted. Seeing that he couldn't win against Zeller, he shouted outside, Madame Wesley. Madame Wesley. Get me another cup of coffee. His voice was very loud, but there was still no response from the corridor. Damn it, Madame Wesley's hearing is getting worse. I'll have to fire her sooner or later. Rieger cursed and increased his volume. After a while, a sturdy old woman walked over from the corridor. She carried a coffee pot and poured another cup for Rieger. Madame Wesley. Rieger said loudly in her ear. Wipe the table, then ask Mason to wake Sif up. If Sif isn't in her room, ask Mason to find that damn torn skeleton. Tell her to bring Sif back to the Liege's residence before noon, understand? Madame Wesley nodded slowly. After packing up. As she carried the things out, she suddenly said to the Lord. Rieger, lower your voice next time. My ears can hear you very clearly. Rieger turned around and sneered at Zeller. The deaf always think their hearing is very good. With that, he raised his voice and said to Madame Wesley, since you always organize the maids to play cards during lunch break, I've decided to lower your salary. The old woman quickly revealed a blank expression. What are you talking about, Rieger? I can't hear you clearly. Speak louder. Rieger shrugged and suddenly whispered. I saw your husband and your son walk into a brothel on Waterpipe Street with their arms around each other's shoulders yesterday. The old woman immediately rolled her eyes at him. You're already in your 40s. Don't joke around like a child. My husband died more than 3 years ago, and you were the one who presided over his funeral. After saying that, she took her things and left without looking back. See, I knew she was pretending to be deaf. She just wants to be lazy and not work. Rieger cursed hatefully. I'll fire her next week. Zeller laughed. You've been saying that for 2 years. Everyone knows you can't fire Mrs. Wesley. She watched you grow up. Rieger blew on his coffee expressionlessly. I'm serious this time. Speaking of which, what about this letter? Matthew is in trouble, Zeller reminded. I think we need to help him. Why? Rieger asked. He's very smart and excellent, Zeller said. The only thing is that he's too young. That's why we can help him. Don't forget, he's someone that Ronan has chosen. Rieger was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, well, tell me, what kind of trouble did he run into? I'll provide help depending on the situation. After saying that, he took another big gulp of coffee. Zeller suddenly stopped talking. After Rieger swallowed all the coffee, he asked curiously. Why didn't you say anything? I'm waiting for you to finish drinking. I'm afraid you'll spray it all over again. Zeller joked. Because the problem Matthew encountered was Blinken of the Dragon Lich sect. Rieger's eyes widened. He looked at the cup in his hand and said self-deprecatingly. Fortunately, you have foresight. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have to change into pajamas. So, that kid went out and provoked a legendary mage. Zeller corrected him. Half-legend, peak of tier 5, level 20. Blinken has been a half-legend for many years. I guess the reason why he hasn't been able to break through is related to the Dragon Lich sect. If he can't advance to a Dragon Lich, he might never be able to advance to legend. Rieger said. Even so, you're trying to persuade me to take the initiative to provoke a 5th-tier mage, and it's the Dragon Lich sect with a great background. If you weren't a warlock yourself, I would have suspected that you were seduced by that kid. Zeller said calmly. We've killed quite a number of tier 5 mages before. Back in Purgatory, we all admit that the gap between those below the legendary realm wasn't that big. If we were to prepare carefully, tier 5 mages would actually be very weak. Seeing Zeller's expression, Rieger's heart skipped a beat, and an expression of resistance appeared on his face. Damn it, it's happening again. I don't want to listen to you now. He tried to cover his ears. However, Zeller pulled them away mercilessly. No, you have to listen. This is very important. In the letter, Matthew mentioned that he had encountered the Dragon Lich cult and Blinken in the rainforest south of Marshwater City, and there had been some conflict between the two sides. In the letter, he described his follow-up plan in detail, hoping that we could point out the shortcomings of his plan. His first step was to negotiate with Blinken. See, this is what I admire most about him. Not only did he know how to write to us, but he also knew how to try to negotiate with the enemy first. Most boys at his age were idiots. They only knew how to fight and be jealous. He knew that violence meant risk, so it should always be the last resort to solve our problems. I'm willing to help a young man with such a bright future. I believe you are the same, Rieger. Rieger couldn't help but nod. However, he immediately felt troubled. So, who should we send? Richard. He kept saying that he had already retired, so it was impossible for him to take action over such a small matter. Dulin and Asma had just returned to Rolling Stone Town a few days ago. They didn't know Matthew and didn't like necromancers. It was definitely not appropriate to send them. Lee Wiki, on the other hand, has been idling around Matthew's forest since we blew up all the passages to the Underdark, complaining that he was bored. I really don't know how he trained his chi. There must be something wrong with this monk's commandments. Zeller crossed his arms and said confidently. Lee Wiki, and you. If the negotiations failed, then both sides would most likely end up in a fight. And if we want to kill a tier 5 mage, Lee Weezy alone is not enough. Although Matthew mentioned in his letter that he had a tier 5 child of the jungle and an arcana machinist whose combat power was unknown, I didn't have any confidence in them. Therefore, I can only ask you to take action. Rieger immediately jumped up from his chair. I'm the Lord of Rolling Stone Town. Do you think I'll go through fire and water for that kid just because he wrote me a letter? It is precisely because you are the Lord of Rolling Stone Town that you should consider the future of Rolling Stone Town. Zeller said seriously, the world is changing, Rieger. The piece of the past is gone. When Doolin and Asma came back, they told you about their encounters overseas. The lock of civilization that Matthew told us about is being broken, and the ambitions of the people are getting bigger and bigger. I suspect that in the next 20 years, many wars will break out on this continent. Bayan City and Jilu City are showing such signs. Even if Ronan could return from the astral plane, his true foundation was still in Jembe. And Rolling Stone Town needs a guardian, an archmage that we can trust. You and I both know Matthew's potential, and now, the opportunity is right in front of you. Believe me, Rüger, there is no better investment than helping a future master currently in need. Rüger revealed a struggling expression. Damn it, Zeller, I knew this would happen. I was almost convinced by you. It was always like this. If you can give me another reason, I'll go. Zeller smiled faintly. You are the most idle person among all the higher-ups in Rolling Stone Town. Is this reason enough? Rüger sat on the chair dejectedly. All right, I'll go. Be careful. Remember to remind Lee Wiki. Zeller untied 2 frog dolls from his waist and handed them to Rüger. I know you're not afraid of necromancers, but nothing is absolute. Rüger took the doll and laughed at himself. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. I've been watching you, Rüger. Zeller said gently, I know that you spent a lot of effort to cultivate that ability for revenge. It is the nemesis of necromancers. This is also one of the reasons why you allow Matthew to hang around you, isn't it? Rüger hung one of the dolls on his waist and shook the other one. I'll give it to Lee Wiki, but he might not need it. Right, how should we get there? This place is too far away from the rainforest. The eastern giant eagle can't carry the 2 of us at once. Chapter 170, This is my way of negotiating. Translator, Lunatree. Zeller laughed again. The owl that Matthew sent to deliver the letter is a high-level blessed nature soul of the goddess of moonlight. When there is moonlight tonight, she will bring you into the kingdom of the goddess of moonlight. After that, Matthew himself will provide the goddess with a coordinate anchor point. You can directly teleport to his side, but the price is that he will owe the goddess of moonlight a favor. This is the cunning part of this kid. He only explained his plan to us and asked for suggestions in the letter. He had no intention of asking for help. However, he wrote down the instructions for us and even told us the price he paid. Look, what a cunning and thick-skinned kid. He already knew how to make full use of his connections. So at his age, what were you doing, Rüger? Facing Zeller's question, Rüger replied without hesitation. I was still in Ponytown at that time. I fought with the bastards from the Turtle Gang every day. Occasionally, I would fight with others because of young and beautiful girls. As he spoke, he suddenly felt that something was wrong and hurriedly stopped. Zeller couldn't help but laugh. Hint, your contracted summon beast, Tauren Skeleton, has leveled up to LV13. Peggy had mastered a series of new abilities. Is she only 1 level higher than me again? However, when he was level 5, Peggy was level 9. Matthew was a little confused. He had signed the most ordinary undead contract with Peggy. If there were a seal, it would definitely have nothing to do with the contract. This kind of incomprehensible thing could only be attributed to the strangeness of Peggy herself. Anyway, she had many strange things about her, so this one was not a big deal. Maybe it wasn't a seal, but my advancement or other actions activated the potential in her body. Matthew collected his thoughts. At this moment, the 4 of them were standing in front of the throne, receiving Suya's blessings. Beams of white light descended. Suya sat upright on the throne, her expression as if she was sacred and inviolable. After coming out of the small forest, she carried herself with an unbelievably elegant and holy temperament. This strong contrast was really impressive. Matthew believed that she would take the opportunity to humiliate him when she blessed everyone. Therefore, he held his breath and gritted his teeth. However, the blessing ceremony was soon over. None of the rubbing, stepping, and kicking that Matthew had expected came. This made him heave a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he also felt a sense of loss. When he left the Black Banyan Dream Realm, Matthew turned around and glanced at Suya, who was sitting on the throne. The latter's face gradually became blurry. In the midst of the haziness, Matthew seemed to see her smile at him. Then, the scenery in front of him began to blur. A gentle force pushed him out of the Black Banyan Dream Realm. Morning, at the edge of the bitter water swamp. Lumiere bent down and carefully examined the marks on the ground. They're moving very fast. They should have reached the depths of the swamp by now. There's no sign of fighting nearby. Strange, such a huge commotion. Could it be that they didn't attract the undead in the swamp? Matthew said solemnly, Blinken is a powerful necromancer. It's normal for him to have a way to appease the undead. What I'm curious about is why he's heading in this direction. Could it be that the bitter water swamp is related to the Dragon Lich cult's search for the Dragon Tomb? Zai pondered and said, I've also heard a little about the former owner of the bitter water swamp. The necromancer named Danya was the city lord of Bayan City for the last 2 generations. She was an archmage who was officially registered in the Alliance. She was considered a very decent necromancer, so she probably didn't have much contact with Blinken. Matthew nodded and said, no matter what, we have to catch up to Blinken first. Everyone, be careful. We can follow their footsteps when we enter the swamp, but try not to step on their footprints. Experienced army masters would leave a few terrifying magic traps in the footprints of their own troops. Many trackers died because of this. At Matthew's signal, Lumiere took the lead. He pushed aside a patch of reeds and followed the footprints. Matthew, Bobo, and Zai followed in one after another. They didn't walk far when a zombie suddenly emerged from the haystack in front of them. As soon as she saw Lumiere, she couldn't help but rush over. Just as Lumiere was about to attack, Matthew shouted in a low voice, retreat. Lumiere did not hesitate and quickly dodged. Matthew began to chant a spell in a low voice. Spell, comforting the dead. Under Matthew's incantation, the zombie gradually lost its desire to attack. She staggered to the side of the crowd until everyone had passed, and she followed behind them. Do you know that zombie? Bobo asked. Matthew looked at Miss Zombie, who was at a loss, and sighed softly. We met once at night. Zai and Lumiere were instantly shocked. Matthew quickly pointed at Bobo and explained, she was also there that night. Bobo seemed to recall something and nodded her head vigorously. Yes. I was there too. As a result, Zai and Lumiere were even more shocked when they heard that. After a long time. Only then did the two of them come back to their senses. Zai coughed and awkwardly changed the topic. Mr. Matthew, I see that there are still many undead along the way. If we keep using the peaceful method, I'm afraid it will affect our speed of pursuit. Matthew waved his hand. It's fine. I won't appease them anymore. If there are any more undead, I'll use this to open a path. As he spoke, he took out Ursul's reprimand from his inventory and held it tightly in his hand. This time, the two of them only glanced at the black and long whip and did not say anything. 10 minutes later. Outside the swamp, on a slightly raised highland, a muscular dragon blood warrior was leading 4 dragon cult disciples and 7 to 8 ground fire dragons to patrol the surroundings. It seems that Blinken has set up a sentry post to guard against pursuers. In the reeds not far away, Zai, who was the first to discover the sentry post, whispered, what should we do? Should he go around them? Mr. Matthew. Matthew said. Of course, we have to kill them in one go. Zai was stunned. But didn't you say that you wanted to negotiate first? Matthew smiled and patted Lumiere and Bobo's shoulders. This is my negotiation method. As he spoke, he was the first to rush out of the reeds. His body expanded rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, he turned into a moon bear. Roar. The moon bear growled as it ran. Instinct casting, fine spell. At that moment, 2 vines with barbs quickly grew from the ground and entangled the dragon blood warrior tightly. Dragon blood warrior. This was a special profession that obtained the gifts, strength, resistance, or curses of the dragon through rituals such as dragon worship and bathing in dragon blood. Within the Dragon Lich sect, they had a complete set of procedures for nurturing dragon blood warriors. These mass-produced dragon blood warriors were not as powerful as those heroes who relied on their own strength to kill dragons and bathe in dragon blood. However, they were still considered powerful among ordinary professionals. The dragon blood warrior trapped by the vines was quite powerful. He had a profession level of level 14, and the dragon wings on his shoulder armor meant that he was ranked 2nd in the Dragon Lich sect's internal level, which was the dragon wing level. According to Zai's introduction, the internal hierarchy of the members of the dragon worship sect was divided into dragon claws, dragon wings, dragon teeth, and dragon souls. This could be easily identified from the clothes they were wearing. Just as the moon bear was about to attack, Matthew saw the dragon wings on the shoulders of the dragon blood warrior emit circles of black magic light. In the blink of an eye, the green vines that were originally wrapped around his body quickly withered as if their life force had been sucked out. In addition to the dragon blood warrior's own resistance, it allowed him to get rid of the vines easily. The dragon blood warrior did not retreat in the face of the moon bear's menacing attack. Instead, he quickly removed a shield of the same height from his back. Then, he charged at Matthew. Bang! A dull thud was heard as the moon bear slapped the shield. The wooden shield produced an unpleasant scraping sound, but the dragon blood warrior only staggered back half a step. Then, he recovered his strength faster than the moon bear. In the next second, the dragon blood warrior let out a low shout and the muscles all over his body swelled up. The mud in the swamp was suddenly kicked back by him. Puff! A simple and unadorned shield bash hit the moon bear's chest. If it weren't for the fact that the moon bear's overall attributes were a lot stronger than ordinary brown bears, he would have been stunned by the shield bash. I didn't expect him to be a guardian. How rare. A trace of regret flashed through Matthew's heart. But the next moment, he didn't hesitate to pounce again. The moon bear and the dragon blood warrior clashed for several rounds, but there was still no winner. At this moment, Lumiere and Bobo also followed suit and launched a surprise attack on the 4 dragon worshippers. The group of earth fire dragons roared and spat out flames that did not differentiate between friend and foe. For a moment, the temporary sentry post was in chaos. Matthew remained calm throughout. He did not lose his mind because of the passionate melee with the dragon blood warrior. Instead, he was always looking for an opportunity. In the 7th round, Moonbear pretended to repeat the same trick. The dragon blood warrior naturally had no intention of retreating. He raised his shield and rushed over. However, at this moment, Moonbear rolled to the side agilely. The dragon blood warrior's momentum was too fierce, and he revealed a flaw. Matthew seized the opportunity to slap him, but the other party was very experienced. Perhaps he had predicted Matthew's attack trajectory. In a flash, the dragon blood warrior raised his shield horizontally and once again blocked Matthew's bare paw. However, this time, he lost his balance and rolled backwards after taking Matthew's palm. And in the few seconds that he rolled on the ground, the dragon blood warrior's weakness was exposed. A low-key saber light flashed. The dragon blood warrior's body was still rolling on the ground. However, his head was held firmly in the arms of a skeleton wearing a black and red cloak. Matthew successfully cooperated with Soldier to kill the dragon blood warrior. He did not delay and directly attacked the group of deformed earth fire dragons. Soldier's one-on-one assassination ability was very strong, especially when someone created a sneak attack environment for him. Every time he attacked, he would land a critical hit. However, when faced with a creature like the earth fire dragon, he had a lot of trouble. Matthew saw him frantically moving around the earth fire dragon. His short knife was like the wind, stabbing the earth fire dragon until it roared and was covered in wounds. However, it did not die. Even though the blade was dipped in poison, the resistance of the earth fire dragon was extremely high. This bit of poison could not affect them too much. On the other hand, Soldier had to be very careful. Be it the flames of the earth fire dragon or that fat body, once they touched Soldier, his small and weak skeleton body would be easily damaged. 10 breaths later, Lumiere had already snapped the necks of the 4 dragon worshippers. From the clothes they were wearing after falling to the ground, it was not difficult to tell that these people were just cannon fodder at the lowest level, which was the dragon claw level. In order to end the battle quickly, Matthew had planned to transform into the winged dragon wind god and coordinate with Bobo. However, he suddenly changed his mind. In the next moment, he gently patted the magic bag. A sweet-looking ghost appeared in front of him. "Go, kill them?" Matthew gave the drifter an order. The drifter nodded gently. Then, she flew to the top of the ground fire dragons. The ghost floated gently for a few seconds and her beauty collapsed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even Matthew, the owner, could not bear to look at the scene. In the next second, a sharp cry burst out from the drifter's body. The cries were mournful, sharp, and unusually sorrowful. They had a very strong spiritual penetrating power. Even Lumiere and Bobo were nearly affected. And the few ground fire dragons suffered the worst. After a round of crying, all the ground fire dragons were stunned on the spot. The drifter gracefully sank down. During this process, her looks were recovering at an extremely fast speed. Miss Drifter lightly walked past a ground fire dragon, and with a wave of her hand, the soul of a simple-minded ground fire dragon was caught in her palm. Hint, your summoned creature, the drifter, has used its ability, sad cries of death. J. The ground fire dragon's immunity failed, intelligence, perception, and will, and they all entered a state of absent-mindedness. In this state, the drifter could activate the second part of the skill, taking soul. In other words, she could directly cross the barrier of the spiritual realm and take away the souls of the absent-minded. The drifter's movements were very nimble. After a few rounds, the souls of the 7 ground fire dragons were all captured by her. She obediently sent these souls to Matthew. Matthew immediately took out a bottle that was usually used to hold pills from his luggage. After emptying the pills, he chanted the most basic soul seal spell. The white smoke slowly dissipated. Very quickly, these weak souls were successively stored in bottles by Matthew. On the ground, the soulless ground fire dragon was dying rapidly. 3 minutes later, they were completely dead. Seeing this scene, the other three did not make a fuss. After all, Matthew had always been publicly known as a necromancer. If he kept relying on his shapeshifting transformation to win, it would be even stranger. This should be a rear guard post. Zai, who had been nowhere to be seen during the battle, appeared immediately after the battle ended. He attentively searched the surroundings and reported. I just found a mini alarm spell nearby, but the source of the alarm is not the members of the sentry post. It seems that Blinken already knows of our arrival. Matthew nodded. It was unrealistic to chase after a great mage without the latter knowing. If Matthew wanted to negotiate with Blinken, he had to let him know that he was chasing him. Matthew had to show a certain amount of strength, or he wouldn't have a chance to negotiate with Blinken. From the way the sentry post was set up in a hurry, he seemed to be in a hurry to do something and didn't seem to be in the mood to pay attention to us. Zai speculated, if that's the case, then there must be quite a few sentries along the way. Their purpose is not necessarily to stop us, but to slow us down as much as possible. Matthew agreed. Therefore, he seized the time to search the corpse. It was a pity that the lower class of the Dragon Lich sect looked very poor. They must have handed over all their money to the cult. Even the dragon blood warrior with the dragon wings only had 7 or 8 gold coins on him. Matthew had no choice but to order soldier to take off the clothes, belts, underwear, shoes, and so on from the corpses. It wasn't that he was stingy. There were simply too many undead in the cemetery at home. Most of them did not have any decent clothes or equipment on them, so Matthew was shopping on their behalf. The group continued to move forward. However, the deeper they went into the swamp, the harder it was to walk. In the afternoon, it was even more foggy. They couldn't even see their fingers when they stretched out their hands. They couldn't even tell the direction, let alone give chase quickly. At this time, it was scary walking around the swamp. If one stepped into a pit, it would be extremely dangerous. Even for professional adventurers, there was a risk of death in the muddy swamp. Matthew was not in a hurry. He held his breath and urged everyone to move forward slowly. Because of the thick fog, the sunlight was greatly weakened, and the drifter had more room to move. Specters were the most comfortable in the swamp. The drifter was lightly exploring the path ahead, pointing out the possible mud or traps ahead. Just like that. Although they stumbled, they did not lose track of the Dragon Lich sect. 3 hours passed. They were already deep into the swamp, but they didn't encounter many undeads along the way. They only killed 3 sentry posts of the Dragon Lich cult. Each sentry post was stronger than the last. The last one was even equipped with 2 archers. If it weren't for the fact that Matthew had Soldier and the Drifter, 2 elite assassins, these 2 archers hiding in the tree would have caused them a lot of trouble. Finally, after a fierce battle, only the unlucky Bobo was hit by an arrow on her knee and helmet. Her armor was very strong, but the archers weren't mediocre either. The arrows they shot were extremely powerful, leaving bruises on Bobo's forehead and knee. This made her extremely angry. She threatened to blow up the Dragon Lich sect slayer on the spot. And in these 3 battles, the most outstanding performance was undoubtedly Matthew's new employee, the Drifter. Specters were semi-invisible, had fast movement speed, and could kill without blinking. They also had 2 incredible abilities, physical damage immunity and death-seeking wails. This allowed the Drifter to enter the Dragon Lich sect's army as if no one was around. After killing a few times, she would be able to completely disrupt the enemy's formation. What followed was naturally a happy harvesting time for Matthew's group. Seeing this scene, Matthew was very pleased at first, but he soon felt a headache. Even though there was a strong worker, Matthew's lineup was less than satisfactory. Putting aside the zombies and skeletons that were cannon fodder, among the contract summons, Peggy was a logistics team leader who had worked hard for many years. Matthew was usually unwilling to send her to the battlefield to fight the enemy head-on. Filey had a strong physique, but he was not tactful enough. He asked for overtime pay every time he appeared, which Matthew loved and hated at the same time. Soldier, assassin, drifter, and an assassin. Matthew looked around and realized that he was the only one left who could be considered a fighter or a tank. In the future, do I need to tank the enemies for my creatures to ambush them from behind? The thought of such a scene coming true made his head ache. I'm already at the 3rd tier now. When I go back and learn spells, I can start learning how to make dark warriors. In the future, if I don't have 7 or 8 dark warriors with me, I'm not leaving. Even so, Matthew had gained a lot from these few battles. Not only did he obtain a certain amount of money, but he also still had the mission to expel or kill the Dragon Lich cult members. These dead members of the Dragon Lich cult contributed 2 new spells to Matthew. Magic Trap: you can use a string to create a circle with a radius of 2 meters on the ground or floor. When you finish casting, the string disappears and turns into an invisible magic trap. After that, when a person or creature, no larger than the trap, steps into the trap, the rope will automatically fly up and firmly bind the person or creature. At this time, the target will have to undergo a round of dexterity check. If the target passes the dexterity check, your magic trap will be ineffective and the target will leave safely. If the target did not pass the dexterity check, they would be suspended in midair and hung upside down until the spell ended. Currently, your magic trap can last for 72 hours. After triggering, the spell will last for 6 minutes, depending on the target's condition. Human immobilizing spell: immobilizing any human in your field of vision. The target needs to undergo a round of perception check. After successful immobilization, the effect lasts for a maximum of 2 minutes. During this period, you can do anything to the target except attack. Once you attack the target will be freed from the frozen state. Remarks: 4 times a day. Of these 2 spells, the magic trap was only average and had a certain use, but the human immobilizing spell was really good. The success rate of this spell was actually not high, but it had the advantage of fast casting speed and short incantation time. Even without the support of supreme magical skills, it was still very suitable for a quick cast. If the target were hit, then it would be like a lottery won. Even though the immobilizing spell would lose its effect once he attacked the target, 2 minutes was enough for him to swing his hammer and charge it up to hit the target's head. Most mortal bodies would inevitably die, and ruthless characters who could withstand all kinds of fatal attacks would not be bound by the spell. With the 2 spells in hand, Matthew was in high spirits. He wanted to find more Dragon Lich cult disciples to have a heart-to-heart talk. However, after taking down the 4th sentry post, there was no one else in the depths of the swamp. They walked for a full hour. Not to mention the Dragon Lich cult disciples, they did not even see the undead who should have been wandering in the swamp. As far as the eye could see, there was a thick fog. Uneasiness spread in the team. Something's wrong. It's too quiet. Matthew, I keep feeling that the footprints on the ground are a little deliberate. Should we avoid them first? The one who spoke was the ace spy, Xiuyi. His face was pale, and he had retreated to the back of the team. Matthew nodded. He was about to order the drifter, who was leading the way, to turn back. Suddenly, they felt the light above them grow darker. Because of the fog, they were not sensitive to light, but at this moment, the sky was completely dark. Everyone felt that something was wrong. They raised their heads and looked up. At this moment, a breeze happened to blow, dispersing some of the fog above their heads. Matthew raised his head, and his eyes instantly widened. He saw a terrifying thing above his head. It was a huge ball, as big as a small mountain. It was precisely because it slowly flew over everyone's heads that the light suddenly disappeared. The shape of the ball was extremely terrifying. Everyone could see clearly that at the edge of the ball were undead creatures. Skeletons, zombies, ghouls, and abominations. Countless undead creatures were gathered together by a strange energy. They struggled and pushed hard, but they could not get rid of the attractive force from the center of the ball. Even Soldier and the Drifter couldn't help but fly upwards when the shadow ball flew over the heads of the group of people. Matthew quickly increased his mental support. Soldier turned sideways and hid in the shadow realm while the Drifter hurriedly flew into Matthew's bag. Warning: Blinken has used a Tier 5 spell, Forbidden Spell, Heavenly Sphere of Death. Heavenly Sphere of Death: using a carefully crafted gravitational sphere of negative energy as the core, it provides a powerful attraction force of negative energy, kneading a large number of undead into a huge ball shape. If the spellcaster had enough magic power and mental strength, he could use an incantation to raise the celestial sphere high and slowly push it. The celestial sphere would attract all the nearby undead along the way. The caster can throw the celestial sphere at any area, causing an impact force like a negative energy meteorite. This move can be used repeatedly until the celestial sphere disappears. The heavenly sphere of death is constantly releasing negative energy. Deceleration halo, decaying halo, weakening halo, and other debuffs. Special warning: if the living gets too close to the heavenly sphere of death and are caught by the undead on the surface of the ball, they will immediately become the new undead on the heavenly sphere and become part of the sphere's undead shell. No wonder the undead in the swamp had disappeared. A flash of lightning flashed across Matthew's mind. At this time, why would he need to read the system message? He instinctively roared, "Run!" The sphere slowly pressed down. Matthew patted his chest, and a ray of moonlight lit up on his badge. With the help of the moonlight, he quickly turned into a raven and flew away. Lumiere and Zaire fled even faster. Bobo, whom Matthew was most worried about, stomped her feet, and flames burst out from the soles of her feet. Her entire body shot to the side like a torpedo. Bang! Bobo crashed into a tree. Fortunately, she had the protection of her helmet, narrowly avoiding the first wave of the sphere's crushing force. However, this was just the beginning. After the huge sphere landed on the ground, all the undead on it extended their hands towards the group. A babbling sound rang in their ears. Everyone who heard it trembled. The huge ball formed by the undead rolled into the swamp. Perhaps it knew that Matthew, Lumiere, and Zaire had their own means of escape. The ball's first target was Bobo. After this fall, Bobo's speed had decreased significantly. Although she immediately stood up and took a few steps, the bottom of her feet kept emitting blue light. It was unknown if the circuit was broken, but it looked very unsmooth, which was really worrying. Matthew flew in the air and looked down at the entire situation. Soon, he saw a black-robed figure 50 meters ahead of him. Seeing this, he hurriedly shouted, "Lumiere! Save her!" He did not need to remind Lumiere because Lumiere was already on his way. He strode out from the reeds at the side and carried Bobo and her armor on his shoulder. At that moment, Lumiere's knees bent involuntarily, but he adapted to the weight in just half a second. Carrying Bobo, he sprinted forward. Lumiere's physique, which was comparable to that of a dinosaur, was fully displayed at this moment. The ball was chasing after them, and the undead reached out their withered hands to grab them. However, he was able to maintain a certain distance from the ball. This gave the undead on the ball a feeling that they were close to their targets. "I am not rushing you," Bobo said with a pale face, "but can you be a little faster?" "I'm a little. Lumiere said calmly, "No, I can't run too fast. That won't attract his attention." As he spoke, he looked up at the sky. The raven, who had been following them, immediately turned back after finding that the two were safe and flew southwest of the swamp. At this moment, the fog had already dissipated. Even Lumiere could clearly see the shadow of the black-robed man. It was the priest of the Dragon Lich sect, the level 20 necromancer Blinken with the Dragon Soul class. The air in the sky was turbulent. Matthew's heart was pounding hard, perhaps because the raven was too fragile. He slowly approached the black-robed Blinken and circled 3 times above his head. Who knew that the latter did not even look him in the eye, which made him feel discouraged. Just as Matthew was about to interfere with the other party's casting, out of the corner of his eye, he suddenly saw a puddle of wet water under the black-robed man's feet. The swamp was damp, and water vapor was everywhere. It was normal for there to be water stains. However, it was obvious that the water stain between the black-robed man's feet was newly formed. It was a little like he had peed his pants. It was not that noticeable, but it did exist. Fortunately, Matthew's perception was extraordinary, and he observed carefully. Otherwise, he really wouldn't have noticed this detail. That's true. In order to deal with us, Blinken even used a tier 5 forbidden spell. The fog just now was most likely his cover for the heavenly sphere of the dead. This guy is so cautious. How could he just stand in front of us and cast a spell? Matthew coldly observed Blinken's movements. As expected, he found some parts of the body that were stiff. It's the water mirror image spell. Matthew made a decisive judgment. But to control a spell like the heavenly sphere of death, he definitely wouldn't be too far away. Even for a level 20 mage, 1 kilometer is the limit. He looked around, but the fog had not completely dispersed, so he could not see clearly. He looked back at Lumi and Ri and found that the latter could still handle it, so he breathed a short sigh of relief. We have to find Blinken's true location. Thinking of this, Matthew flapped his wings and landed on a thick branch. After transforming into human form, he did not dare to rest for a moment. He jumped under the tree and knelt on his left knee. The 5 fingers of his right palm slowly opened and then gently clasped the soft soil. Ability: Equalize Perception. In an instant, the colors of the world lost all meaning in Matthew's eyes. A brand new worldview slowly unfolded in front of him. The world that was purely made up of energy fields only had 2 colors, black and white. However, Matthew felt the huge difference between targets that were equally black or equally white. It was worth mentioning that this difference in perception was also presented in the form of color. It was an indescribable feeling. If described, he could say that they were colorful black and monotonous black. He could clearly sense the elemental field formed by the four basic elements of earth, fire, wind, and water. They maintained the stability of every inch of space in the material world. They were clearly separated from each other, so it was easy to distinguish them. The elemental field was the cornerstone of the existence of the energy field. The layer above was the slightly ambiguous color of the ether field, also known as the magic field. Most spellcasters gathered energy from this field to cast magic. Matthew looked around and saw that the ether field was broadcasting large-scale, high-level spells almost all the time. Meteorite annihilation, time backtrack, chaos calamity, group malicious transformation, reality remodeling. However, these spells were constantly released in the microscopic environment. The magic cycle in the ether field reflected the instability of magic. The effect it had on the real world was minimal, but there would occasionally be unlucky people affected by it. For example, a magic apprentice who was conducting a basic potion experiment did not do anything, but the bottle on the table suddenly fell, which led to a series of disasters, such as a laboratory fire. People might think that the tragedy was caused by the carelessness of the magic apprentices. But in reality, it was also possible that the self-release of a legendary spell under the microscopic level had a rare slight impact on the reality of the material world. This was the wonder of this world. Magic could create destruction and destroy creation. Above the ether field was the element field with more units and more colors. The elements were the matrix that formed the domain. They were originally controlled by the ether field. When the spellcaster pried the power of the ether field to release a spell, they would also utilize the elements in an equal proportion. However, once a large amount of elements were gathered in a certain object or life form, the special window of domain was born. Those who mastered the domain could reverse the power of the ether field or even the elemental field from top to bottom, using the elements as a medium. This was the origin of domain ability. The gods manipulated the domains and used their power to become gods, but they also tied themselves to the domains inextricably. Matthew could clearly see the domains he had mastered in the element field. They were either oval or triangular in shape, big or small, but it was more appropriate to describe them as windows. Looking down through the domain, the units in the elemental field could be seen at a glance. If one looked up, everything became blurry. Because that was the real material world. The above feelings only happened in a flash. After Matthew activated his equalized perception, he immediately discovered the abnormality of the ether field and the elemental field. He saw at least 6 figures nearby, spread out from far to near. A large amount of magical energy was surging between the figures. Water mirror images, all 6 of them. Matthew was enlightened. The distance between each water mirror image was no more than 500 meters, and the furthest one was only about 2.4 kilometers. Lincoln himself was probably near the water mirror image at the furthest end. He constructed a magic energy link between the 6 water mirrors, and through this link, he could remotely cast spells. This was undoubtedly a huge consumption of his mana, but it was safer. Matthew also noticed that the water mirror image that appeared in front of them was obviously different from the mirror images in the middle that were used to transmit magical energy. This mirror image had real combat ability. Lincoln also relied on this terminal combat mirror image to control the heavenly sphere of the death. If he dared to rush forward rashly, the mirror image before them would definitely throw negative energy spells at him. However, the mirror images between the image before them and the last image were different. Whether it was to save mana costs or to increase the efficiency of energy transmission, Matthew judged from the fluctuations of the ether field that these mirror images were simply utility poles. They had the ability to conduct and guide magic power, but they could not react to the surrounding situation in time. This gave Matthew an opportunity. Lincoln summoned this fog not only to cover up the heavenly sphere of the death but also to cover up his water mirror transmission chain. Matthew's heart was burning. Even if a normal Tier 3 mage could identify the existence of the mirror terminal, it would be impossible for them to sever the energy transmission chain in such a short period of time. The powerful class characteristics of the Envoy of Equilibrium were displayed to the extreme at this moment. Matthew turned off the energy field. As a result, his brain felt extremely dizzy. Fortunately, he managed to stabilize his body after swaying a few times, and his spiritual power was slowly recovering. What a huge consumption. My focus has dropped drastically. Matthew was secretly shocked. He didn't know if it was because it was his first time using equalized perception, but in just a few seconds, his spiritual power was almost drained by this ability. According to his current state, without external interference, he would need at least a 15-minute short break to recover his mana. Fortunately, the shapeshifting transformation did not consume mana. Matthew braced himself and transformed into a raven again, flying toward the second mirror image. In less than half a minute, Matthew successfully found the water mirror image hiding behind the 2 banana leaves. Facing Matthew's approach, the water mirror image seemed to be oblivious. It just stared blankly in the direction of the first mirror image, and the arcane emblem on its forehead flickered with red and blue. Matthew did not hesitate. He pulled out his crossbow and fired a headshot at close range. Puff! The arrow successfully penetrated the mirror image's head, and a hole as thick as a finger appeared on it. However, the mirror image was not damaged. Water flowed around the hole and slowly repaired it. Matthew noticed. During this process, the arcane emblem on the forehead of the mirror image turned into a bright red light. Is the red light a bad reaction from the energy network? Matthew's heart sank. Blinken had probably realized that he was sabotaging things, so he had to end the battle quickly. The crossbow was useless, so he took out his charge staff and fired 5 arcane missiles in a row. Matthew deliberately fired 5 missiles at different locations. The arcane missile mercilessly pierced through the water mirror's head, neck, chest, thigh and abdomen. 5 holes of equal proportion instantly appeared, and water was sizzling out. The red light on the mirror image's forehead flashed even more intensely. But not long after, it completed its self-repair once again. This time, Matthew was a little anxious. His right hand rummaged through his inventory for a while. He was not satisfied with the various items he touched until he touched a bottle of something warm. Matthew finally smiled. In the next moment, he threw out the last bottle of blazing glue and half a bottle of fiery dragon oil. A bright flame flashed. Puff! The wet banana leaves on the side caught fire, and the raging fire instantly burned the mirror image. This time, the mirror image poured out with water. But it was useless. Blazing glue and fiery dragon oil instantly evaporated the mirror image. Hint: you have destroyed Blinken's water mirror image. His spell ritual, super long-range transmission, has been destroyed. Warning: the heavenly sphere of the death has lost its controller. It may attack any target nearby on its own. Arsonist's props are still the best. Although these props were sold outside on the market, the quality was really uneven, and the price was even more ridiculous. Most of the time, the blazing glue one bought from profiteers for cheap was expired and could not be burned at all. Even if it started burning, the fire was pitifully weak, and the effect was far from as strong as the arsonist's self-made firebomb. After noting this down, Matthew quickly turned back into a raven and went back to check on the situation at the battle scene. In the swamp, the rolling ball suddenly stopped. The undead on the shell howled wildly. They kept reaching out to Lumiere, trying to capture him and make him one of their own. However, the ball could only roll back and forth at this moment. It could not reach Lumiere and Bobo at all. It stopped. Matthew succeeded. Lumiere's face was filled with joy. Bobo's face was pale as she patted his shoulder. Then put me down quickly. I'm about to throw up. Lumiere immediately put Bobo down. However, halfway through, the ball suddenly started rolling again, and this time, it was faster and more violent than before. Lumiere was startled, but his reaction was excellent. He grabbed Bobo with one hand and ran away without caring about her painful cry. The ball chased after him crazily for a while, but it was attracted by a crocodile passing by the edge of the swamp and deviated from its pursuit. Before the crocodile could understand what was going on, it was dragged in by countless hands. The shellmate of the undead squirmed violently, and not long after, a crocodile with only half of its skin and flesh was on it. The zombies beside it were still frantically tearing at its flesh and blood. The crocodile opened its bloody mouth in anger, but it was quickly gnawed until only its bones were left. Lumiere and Bobo, who had run a certain distance away, saw the scene and felt a chill run down their spines. But soon, the anger in Bobo's eyes surged out uncontrollably. Matthew minus. Red light flashed above her head as she roared at the sky. Just then, a raven flew over. Without another word, Bobo pulled out a small black object from her backpack and threw it into the sky. Matthew hurriedly took it with his beak. He looked down and saw that it was a push-type remote control with a lever. That ball over there, can I blow it up? Bobo asked loudly. Matthew held the remote control in his beak and said, "You can blow that thing up however you want." Very good. Bobo took out the bomb from her backpack and stuffed the bomb into Lumiere's hands. When it gets close, stuff this into the stomach of that abomination at the top of the shell. Lumiere weighed the bomb in his hand and said readily, "No problem." Bobo rummaged around in her backpack for a while and found 2 larger boxing gloves. Then, she put the medium-sized boxing gloves on her own small boxing gloves and attached the largest boxing gloves to the outermost layer. Like and subscribe.